Hello, and thanks for joining us today on this edition of the Capitol Update. If you're watching the show, it means that you care about the government, and today I'm happy to have Senator Osmek, Representative Pugh, and Representative Hertaus with us. Everyone, thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Randy.
Thanks, Randy. It's great to be back.
You know, this warm Friday as we're taping this, and you guys broke out of the Capitol. A lot of stuff going on in the Capitol these days. We hear about them in the news, we hear them on Twitter, we see them on Facebook, but I'm glad you guys are here so that we can get firsthand conversations about what's
Good to
happening.
see people on the lake on the way out here.
Wasn't that great?
Last year at this time
Great
it was
fun.
still iced over.
Right, I forget about that. That's true. So that's fantastic. You know, I thought we'd start talking today, David, just because in today's paper you had a really nice op-ed where you called out the governor, actually, on his decision on who he appointed to the Met Council. I thought it was a very well article. Of course, there are viewers that are not going to think it was a well-written op-ed, but I thought it was very factual, and I want to turn it over to you to talk a little bit about your article that you wrote and about the Met Council.
Sure, Randy. It actually was a twofer. There's always been a lot of frustration on our side of the political aisle, especially in the west side of the metro, as far as how the Metropolitan Council operates. The first part of that op-ed was talking about the fact that 4 counties have been forced to go to Washington, D.C., get themselves a lobbyist, and actually fight for some of their responsibility to come back and funding to come back to them, because the Metropolitan Council has ingrained its tentacles in so far into our metropolitan operations. I even proposed earlier this week what's called the Metropolitan Council Killer Bill, which was a stack of papers about that thick. That just goes to prove how much they have gotten themselves into cities and counties and all kinds of other parts of government operations. But the other part that you referenced was the Metropolitan Council chair. I did a little analysis, and when I met Mr. Dunnick, I thought he was a very young, very personable individual.
And for the listeners, Mr. Dunnick is the current appointed chair of the Met Council.
Correct. Nice enough guy, seemed to have a good head on his shoulders, and I did say up front right away, I want to see what his qualifications are. So I did do some investigating. I asked for the resumes to find out who applied to the Metropolitan Council and who were the people that were interviewed and what was the person like that he picked and who did he pass over. Well, it was rather disturbing when I started to look more and more at this. We had a state senator with 14 years, a former state senator with 14 years of experience, with a law degree from Columbia School of Law. He didn't even get an interview. Nothing, no interview whatsoever. We've got city council members, mayors, we got people with educational degrees going to St. John's of Minnesota all the way over to Notre Dame. Most of these people didn't see the light of day. The one person, when you look at the resumes, there were a couple of people that didn't have any elected experience. Mr. Dunnick was one of them. There were only 2 people that didn't have some educational degree. And of course, that's not necessary. I mean, you could make the case that some of our greater entrepreneurs, Bill Gates comes to mind, didn't get a college degree. But we had many people with many educational degrees, and Adam Dunnick doesn't have an educational degree either. But what he does have is a wedding ring, because he is married to this chief of staff of the governor of the state of Minnesota. The nepotism and cronyism that I saw when I read these resumes is just breathtaking, that we would appoint somebody with that lack of experience and lack of educational prowess to be responsible for thousands of employees and $1 billion budget. Come on, Governor, you've got to be more honest, and we cannot continue to have Governor Dayton be delivering cronyism Minnesota style.
And I think it's important to say the one number again. The Met Council, who is an unelected body, has a budget that is north of $1 billion.
Right.
It's important for people to hear how big that is.
Exactly. It's very important. And also the fact that, we also tried to this session get in some accountability into the Metropolitan Council, and the governor sent his staff over, called up Met Council staff and had them come over and try and torpedo my bill, which would have allowed, and we've talked about it before, it would have allowed city councils to have some level of input into the appointment process to determine, do these people have resumes that make sense, or are they just political cronies, and is a Met Council appointment simply just political payback? Met Council representatives make just the reps, make $20,000 a year for a part-time job. That ain't chicken feed.
No.
So we need to have something more than cronyism in Minnesota, and I hope Governor Dayton realizes that.
Well, again, I thought it was a great article. Thank you, Senator, for wrapping that up and giving us a brief on that. I suspect we'll be hearing a lot more about the Met Council, both in this session that we're talking about right now, in the session that you guys are on for the next 4 weeks, and probably into the future, because the Met Council is finding their way everywhere, and we as Republicans don't care for that. So, Jerry, I'd like to turn it over to you for a little bit here. I know that you've been busy, as everybody over in St. Paul, but there was one bill that you and I spoke about that you authored that I'd actually like you to talk about.
Well, thank you, Randy. And there's a family in our district, John and Julie Gleason, who live in Greenfield, formerly lived in Independence, and their son went to Orono High School. Colton Gleason was the young man, widely publicized incident that happened up in St. Cloud 2 years ago, where presumably through the actions of kind of a gang initiation was popular about 2 years ago. We had it going on down in Minneapolis and some of the other urban areas, but up in St. Cloud this happened also, the act of what's called sucker punching, where you just randomly come up to somebody and do a knockout, just hit them on the side of the head and knock them out. And John and Julie's son, Colton, 21-year-old college student who was just stopping to visit a few friends in St. Cloud before he was going to meet his family for the weekend, was a victim of this random act of violence and was sucker punched and ultimately died a few hours later as a result of the fall to the ground and the concussion and fractures that happened from hitting the concrete. And it's disturbing because the individual that was charged and is now being adjudicated was a juvenile who was in juvenile detention and was released from the detention portion of his sentence for previous crimes, was supposed to be hooked up onto intensive supervised, not intensive, but supervised release or supervised monitoring. And we have a policy in Minnesota where we use private contractors to implement the supervised release part of the sentencing guideline. And oftentimes, because it's in policy, those ankle bracelets and the monitoring systems don't get hooked up right away when they're released. So this young man who went out and caused this act actually had a little bit of a Mardi Gras, if you will, or a vacation in the middle of his sentence and was permitted to be roaming the streets, and this act happened. What the law that I chief authored was to make that transition from detention, whether you're in prison, which is under Department of Corrections, whether you're in jail, which is under the Department of the Counties, or whether you're in juvenile detention, that any supervised release, or in the case of prison, intensive supervised release, that any transition from incarceration or detention to supervised release must happen in a seamless manner in which there's no gap, no delays in getting that equipment hooked up. So that's what the bill is about, and it's very bipartisanly supported. Is included in the Public Safety Division report that's been forwarded, will be hitting the House floor soon, and is also to be soon heard on the Senate floor. Senator Osmek carried that for us on the Senate side.
While nothing replaces the loss of a child, and no parent should ever have to outlive their children,
Yeah.
I'm sure the parents are very happy that you authored a bill in the name of their son that can hopefully stop this senseless crime.
Well, you can never right the wrongs that have already happened, but Mr. and Mrs. Gleason came to the Capitol on numerous occasions and just want to make sure that this never happens to one of their children. And that maybe ties into a couple of other quick things that maybe happened out here. We also have two other bills that are moving forward in the legislature. One is the Tyler Hill Sunshine law. That is a law that talks about college programs and international exchange programs, where we in the United States are required to register our programs overseas, but the overseas ones oftentimes don't happen. We had an incident to a son of a family here in our district also that went to Japan and there was an incident over there, and if maybe the families could have known a little bit more about the success of the program, about the safety of the program, and even such simple things when you're traveling, even you or I wouldn't think about it when we travel, that emergency call number in Japan is 119, not 911. Just little relevant things like that that could make a difference to save somebody's life. And then lastly, there's another bill called Steve's Law that was actually passed into law last year. And Sheriff Stanek thought it was a really good idea. So on his own, he went ahead and trained Hennepin County first responders. Steve's Law is about the opioid overdosing and what happens with opium overdoses, and many of them are prescription drugs, is it really shuts down the autonomic system in the brain, so you stop breathing. And what naloxone or Narcan is the common product that's known. If that's administered, and it's almost impossible to do any harm by giving this drug. So if it's administered in a timely fashion when the first responder shows up, it inhibits that receptors from having the opioids interrupt the autonomic system, keeps them breathing. They still got to get to the hospital, still need medical treatment, but it saves lives. And so what the bill does is provide some additional funding to get this out into the rest of the state and into the counties for training. Ironically, here in the district again, Sheriff Stanek's first save was in Greenfield about 4 weeks ago. There was an opioid overdose. The first responder came, gave the naloxone, and a life was saved. So it's three things that all happened to people in our district, and things that we're sent there to do. So,
well, that last one's a great success to see a bill passed into a law and then actually hit the street and work properly is fantastic. Thank you, Jerry.
yeah, thank you.
So, Cindy, you're on the GovOps. Things are busy for you as
Well,
well.
they have been, and before I just share a couple of updates, I wanted to thank both of my colleagues for the great work that they have done, and specifically David with regard to the Met Council, and he's just done really fantastic work, and Jerry on so many levels. It's just wonderful having partners like them representing our district so well.
Thank you, Cindy.
And I just wanted to say something really quickly as an add-on to what Jerry just mentioned. I'm a co-author on 2 of those bills, and I need to add my name to the 3rd, and I can't believe I haven't done that. But specifically with regard to Steve's Law, I have met with a number of constituents over the course of the last 2 years. I heard about this about 2 years ago when I first met with a constituent who's living with a son who has this concern. And there are many of our constituents throughout our district that are struggling with with drugs and addiction. And this was a fantastic law that we worked really hard to get passed. And I'm just delighted to hear from Jerry that there will be funding included in our proposal. And again, with the omnibus bills that are going to be coming forward here over the course of the next 10 days, it's just a proposal from the House, but all 3 of these are just really, really great bills. Our daughter traveled overseas and was a part of one of these programs and knew a student at the university that she attended, Miami University in Ohio, who's a family whose son lost his life as well. And what I learned about this bill, which I heard, which is wonderful, is, and Jerry just briefly mentioned it, but up until now, this any entity overseas does not need to register with the Secretary of State's office. Well, now they do, or they will, when the governor signs this. And it's just really important for peace of mind, something parents don't think about. I serve on the Higher Education Committee, and when I first heard about this bill, thinking about how many parents allow their students their kids to travel on these programs, they never think about the possibilities. So this is the real life impact of legislation that we're passing. So, but I do want to talk about the Met Council, and it's so important. You mentioned it, Randy, but the Met Council is the 2nd largest regional government in the United States of America.
Let's say that again.
It is the second largest regional government in the United States of America. And it is this behemoth, layer of government that has really outstretched, overreached its statutory authority, and that is what the sub-council, the Met Council Transparency and Accountability has been focused on this entire session. And that sub-council is a part of the Government Operations Committee on which I serve and am the vice chair. And so we have been hearing from elected officials who have experienced the overreach, and we could be talking about this all day. So I will just direct anybody who's listening who may be interested in learning more to go onto the State of Minnesota website, and just the the Met Council subcommittee and just listen to some of those hearings, and they will be very, very surprised. So I'm just delighted with the number of bills that have come forward. For example, one of our colleagues has brought forth a bill to rein in the Met Council via the Thrive 2040 plan. It's this plan that is very telling to the local elected officials and entities what they will be doing with regard to housing, and it's, again, just government run wild. I'll just leave it at that.
Well, and that's a great point to bring up. And I want to add this to our listeners. Many times after we do these shows, the listeners will call the studio complaining about the subject matter, and I would ask that anybody that is listening or watching this, please call one of the three at the table here if you want true information. The producers here do not have the information necessary. They have some, but this is real information. This is not made up information. If you don't agree with something that Mr. Osmek or Representative Pugh or Hertaus said, please contact them and talk to them. They want to hear from you, but these are facts, and you need to hear that. So, with that, we're going to run to break. Okay. And when we come back, we'll start talking about the budget and a few other things. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Well, welcome back. As we went to break, we talked about the fact that we would open up this portion of our conversation talking about the budget. Every session, every other session, I guess, we start talking about budget, and there always seems to be a conflict. We have passed our first proposed budget, we being the House, Cindy, as I look at you thinking
Yes.
I'm a House member, which I am not. So, but why don't I turn it over to you, and why don't you give us a little overview of where we are and where we're going.
All right, well, thanks, Randy. So yes, the House has passed its what they call targets, and the House is planning to spend in the range of $39,949 is, I think, the number. And just to put that in perspective, the governor is his budget targets are over $44 billion. So that is there's a lot of disparity, and that will be
15%.
what is covered between now and the end of the session, which must be done by the 18th of May. So a lot is going to be happening here, and Republicans believe that family spending that government shouldn't be growing any more than what families have. And since 2000, families have experienced a 12% increase in spending, and the governor, just to put in perspective, the governor's budget would reflect a 75% spending increase.
Wow.
So it's very, very out of touch. It is not reflective of Minnesotans, and the Republican budget reflects about a 1.7% increase over the current biennium, in which we are right now, the 2 years, and the budget is for 2 years.
Okay.
So that just puts that in perspective, frames it up a little bit.
Yeah, this is going to be interesting, these last 3 weeks
Very.
of the session. Representative, you and I have had some conversations about the fact that some people would say Republicans should be cutting the budget, and we're not. We're up 1.7 as Representative Cindy had just said. But you and I had the conversation that some of the reasons why this budget has to go up is for all the escalators that were put in place by previous legislatures.
Well, that's correct, Randy. And in the last biennium, there were a lot of what we call tails into legislation or laws that are passed that carry forward into the next biennium. So the Democrats are touting right now that our budget targets and our proposals are the largest spending budget ever in the history of Minnesota. And that's a true statement, because much of what was passed in the last 2 years under their complete control is tails that really we're obligated to fund according to the law. The other aspect of it is we have a very fast-growing baby boom population that is retiring. We have increased need for medical and HHS services, and we have a big chronic problem with the rollout and the delivery of the MNsure program, which has not gone well. And we're having more and more people are getting shifted over to Medicaid, and Medicaid causes a state-based funding that we're required to do. And so we have HHS growth in spending that is out of control and will outpace every other division of government if we don't do something about it. So it's a real challenge. It is a real challenge to govern in that regard. Now, with regard to a couple of other issues about the budget, as Cindy mentioned, the governor has targets, and ideologically, Democrats and Republicans have some differences of opinion. Democrats feel that it's important for government to take $2.1 billion and inject it into the economy, as though the economy cannot grow without government growing and government spending growing, and that government creates jobs. Whereas we in the Republican caucus believe that that same amount of money injected into the economy, in the private market, and the decisions made by everyday people will determine the best and the most efficient use of that injection of capital. And we believe it's better to keep it in the hands of local people. And as a segue into that, one of the bills that I chief authored regarding the budget surplus is that we have bad policy in Minnesota in that the state of Minnesota collects property tax. It's a very regressive tax, collects it from a certain group of people, and that is all of the businesses and all of the commercial industrial property and all of the seasonal recreational property. And the issue about property taxes is it doesn't reflect income. It doesn't reflect your ability to pay. Whether you made a profit that year or whether you lost, you still have to pay your property taxes, and that's true of business. Also, it's true if you lost your job as a private individual, you still have to pay your property taxes. And the regressiveness of it is a real problem. The current levy of state general tax levied on this very singled out group of property owners, 132,000 commercial industrial property owners across the state, is going to be $870-some million under current law. The law that I wrote excludes or provides a property tax exclusion on the lowest tier, and it will provide a tax exemption for value as written now up to about $500,000 of value. So in every small town in Minnesota, all across the state, whether it's the corner restaurant in Wayzata or the auto repair in Long Lake, or whether it's
Billy's up in Burgess.
No matter where it is, these small businesses will see about a 25 to 40% reduction in their property tax bills. That's money that stays right in that town. It's not extracted and shipped to St. Paul for redistribution. So the small town restaurant in Baxter, Minnesota might be able to build a patio outside, might be able to employ a part-time person, and there's every reason why this is good economic growth and stimulus, and why it's good policy when we have a surplus to get rid of bad policy. So that will constitute about 25% of the surplus.
Well, that'll be interesting to see how
Excited
that
about
comes
that.
down.
It's going to be wonderful.
So I do want to ask this question, seeing that we talked about the differences in budget, and we'll move, Senator, to you. Shutdown or no shutdown? Shutdown or no shutdown?
Well, I hope that it doesn't happen. I think the governor would be foolish to rule it out in terms of his ability to negotiate the best budget from his point of view. And I think it would also be the same issue with regard to the Republican budget. I think those are issues that ultimately always come down to the final negotiations and as to what kind of compromise can be reached.
Okay. No. Yes or no?
I'm not going to be surprised if that happens. In fact, the minority leader has already made remarks on the floor to the Republicans saying, sounds like you're heading for a shutdown. And so I've been thinking this, and I'm hopeful I agree with what Jerry said. You know, the last 4 weeks here, and especially the last days, are going to be very, very interesting. So.
Okay.
If Mark Dayton and his compatriots in the Senate want to shut the government down, and they're going to do it over the gas tax, they're going to force a distributor's tax that's going to increase at the bottom level 16 to 18 cents a gallon. We have $2 billion roughly of surplus to use. If that's not enough for the Democrats, it just proves one thing: they don't know how to budget and they don't know how to spend. 75% chance that we will not shut down. There's part of me that thinks that it's possible, but it won't be my responsibility. It will be theirs, because they will be so demanding of increasing gas taxes on hardworking Minnesotans.
And I would say that the House will not agree to any of that. That would be funding transit, and we are vehemently against that, I do believe. So
Well, we'll see. We'll know soon. Senator, you've had a few other things going on. You want to discuss We talk about so many different things. I'm leaving this out to you to deal the card as you want. So.
Well, one of the, in going from where Jerry was with small business, is one of the real small business proposals that we took up yesterday on the Senate floor was the liquor bill. And as usual, there was an amendment to allow Sunday sales. I supported it last year. I've been a very vocal, one of the 3 senators in the Senate that has been very vocal on this. I even went on a little beer run to Wisconsin as a promotional stunt, or you might say, to advertise that this is really a silly law. Minnesotans can buy something 6 days out of the week, but you can't on the 7th. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to us. This is small business 101. The small businesses in Minnesota that are liquor store owners are already paying their property taxes, are already paying the leases and the rents on their facilities. They're already paying for electricity to keep the beer cold because they don't let the beer warm up on Sunday and then cool it back off on Monday. Everything is still there. They might have a little electricity cost. What they're going to have to do is deal with a little shift in labor. Instead of having to have many more people on Sundays, they could put more labor more labor in Saturdays, they can put a little bit into Sundays. It's a small business approach, and on the Senate floor, we had 22 votes last year. This year we had 28, and one of the supporters was missing, 29 really. I think it may happen. It'll depend on what our friends in the House do.
I'm optimistic about it. Jerry and I were 2 of 21 who voted in the House for this last year, and there are a whole lot more. Again, our speaker has said it's 50-50. He's going to give it a vote, and I'm optimistic that it is going to pass. It's a free market issue.
And I think that the drought continues in the Senate.
Yeah.
And so we'll see what happens. Thirst is a terrible thing.
It's a wonderful thing, depending on how you look at it.
Let's be real clear. This isn't necessarily the biggest issue on our plates by any stretch of the imagination.
Not at all.
I'm working on a bill to allow small businesses to be able to get access to repair manuals and repair equipment so that they could fix iPods and fix electronics. That's important to some people. This is very important to them, and this isn't the only thing that we do at the Capitol, but it's just one of those things, and it's one of the things we pick up as legislators, that people want something, and you find out, is it something that's worthy of the state that we really should do, and do you support it? And that's where it goes from there.
Sure. Well, we need to wrap up, and this is a yes or no answer. Stadium fatigue, yes or no?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Another one?
Okay, and that's the answer. So I want to thank you all for coming today. The show always goes by so quickly. A lot more information. Thank you for everything that you guys are doing. It's going to be, the next 4 weeks are going to be a lot of work. We look forward to having you back after that to talk about how we finished up.
Sounds great.
Thank you all for joining us today. And remember, if you have a question, please call one of the people at the table versus our producers. Talk to them, and you'll get some great answers. Thanks for joining us today on the Capitol Update.